All right, welcome back to the channel, or welcome if you're new. I have not recorded in quite a while, and the main reason is that I was moving. So I no longer live in Utah, where I was previously living. Now I have a gorgeous location here in Hawaii, and that move has taken a lot of time. In fact, if I flip my camera around, what you'd see is boxes everywhere because it's still in progress. But I finally have the opportunity to make a video and thought I would do that. Today's video won't be too extensive. I just wanted to touch on some of the changes that Breya has undergone because it actually has evolved in the meantime. And I'll definitely be doing a longer recording with more games coming up. But in the meantime, I'd touch on one game because a few of the changes actually show up in the game and should be interesting for you. Uh, First thing though, I'll talk about real quickly is just where the deck is at. So I don't remember exactly the list actually the last time that I produced a video, but I will talk about some of the changes that stand out to me that I know have been made. Certainly the addition of both the Abyss and Karn the Great Creator. These are cards I've played with before, off and on in the past. They feel really well positioned right now. It looks like the meta is very much about doing broken commander combo related plays. These cards are really good at potentially dealing with those. The Abyss is just, tear every turn for their commander. And of course, Karn shutting off busted artifacts, always welcome. There are other things Karn can do, of course, like animating a Thran Dynamo and smashing a Jace the Mind Sculptor or something. There are, and even occasionally, not too often, but the -2, the ability to get an artifact from outside the game, can be useful. Typically, if you've like Yawgmoth's willed and had to like discard some artifacts, maybe you'd like to get back something like that if they Bojuka Bog you. But generally speaking, the reason you play the Karn is just as a single target null rod, sort of part 2 on the Vandalblast theme. And then the Abyss combined with Breya, it's just another way to repetitively deal with commanders, and sometimes with entire decks. Like some decks just crumple to the card. It's a very powerful card. It's pretty old school and can be slow. You can draw it at the wrong time, and of course, it can do nothing. But the upside is very high and possibly worth it. So we'll see if the Abyss continues to remain in the deck, but it's felt pretty good so far, actually. Other changes, let's see. On the 3-drop side, not too much. There is no more Sword of Feast and Famine, actually down in Artifact. It used to be the case that if I ran Sword of Feast and Famine, which gives pro black and pro green, you could use the Abyss. You could equip a creature, give it pro black, and then use the Abyss so that that creature could not be targeted by the Abyss. It was kind of a workaround when you wanted a creature out other than Breya, like maybe you don't have any Thopter tokens or Breya's not come down yet. You could like do that trick with a Snapcaster, for example. But we don't have that. Instead, there's a new card from, I think it's Kamigawa Neon something. Yeah, let's see, Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, and it's this insane card, totally nuts. The Reality Chip. So a 2 casting cost legendary artifact creature equipment. Jellyfish. So it's 2 mana, so you can fetch it with Muddle the Mixture. It's an artifact, so you can fetch it with Tezzeret. It's an equipment, so you can fetch it with Stoneforge. So this thing is incredibly easy for you to go get. And it's an artifact creature, so it does dodge the Abyss. But the main thing is it lets you look at the top card of your library, so it helps you plan. And then if it gets attached to a creature, for 3, which you can do for 3 mana, you get to Future Sight, which is just nuts. Future Sight is, back in the day, was one of the complement. It was roughly like a light, almost a Necropotence in Breya back in the day, but it was just a little bit pricey at triple blue and 2/2. However, to be able to sneak like the Reality Chip down and just get to work is absolutely amazing. So this card's replaced, once again, card drawing or card access, typically better than discard. So the Sword of Feast and Famine, I absolutely love the card. It is a mana source often, but It could be kind of a dead draw at times. At least with the reality chip, you can proactively play it. You get a little bit of information as far as what your next draw will be, which can be useful when you have fetch lands and things. And then if you can equip it, it's just absolutely a bonkers card, and you'll see that in the game that I'm about to run through. Other changes, cards that have been in and out over time. A Braid, Confidant actually has been in and out. Things like that. A card from quite a while back, Cyclonic Rift. I don't need to explain this to any Commander players. I do want to explain why it's in here, though, even though this is kind of 1v1 focused. In multiplayer, this card always comes in. In 1v1, it's a little weaker because all of the disenchants and mana disruption is completely focused on you. But having said that, it does a couple different things. It's very easy to search for, of course, because you can merchant scroll for it, you can muddle for it, and so forth. But also, Cyclonic Rift, in a format with the Jeweled Lotus, is a way to, and of course cards that have already been in the format, Mana Vault and Grim Monolith and so forth. It's a way to punish, a ritualed out or a cheated out commander on 2 mana, which you could potentially then Snapcaster or Will and play the Overload version later on if you need to. It's also one of those cards that's kind of a get out of jail free card for situations where you're mana flooded, you don't have a lot going on, but perhaps you have access to something like a Rift that will just buy you time. Sometimes that's enough. And other times you can do something really backbreaking like Rift into like a Winter Orb play or Rift into a My Twist play and completely just take over the game. Also, sometimes you can do funky stuff with Cyclonic Rift and the fact that it's a permanent you don't control. Sometimes it's a solution to theft and things of that nature. So I mean, the card's great. It's always been great. It's just a little bit of card disadvantage when you first use it. You're trading tempo for cards with this card always, but the amount of tempo that you can swing sometimes is so excessive, and sometimes the only way that you can save yourself in a game. It's just powerful enough that, and it's blue, you can force with it, so it's just powerful enough that I think the card probably is going to stay indefinitely once again, unless we get to the point where, to a point where the cards that we can add from future sets are just so good that ultimately we end up cutting Cyclonic Rift. But I don't think we're there yet. And this card also will play a role in the next game. So other than that, there has been Prismatic Ending has been added to the deck. It's an amazing card because you always pay at least a mana cost of the thing that you're removing if it's 1 mana or more. So, if you pay a single white, you can remove a Soul Ring. So that means, they go first turn Soul Ring, you go first turn Prismatic Ending. For that, with that purpose alone, the card's fantastic. So Prismatic Ending, Portable Hole, and Vandal Blast all let us take out a first turn Soul Ring or Mana Crypt for a single mana. Great card. And then, of course, later on, you can use it to exile Planeswalkers. You can use it to do other things. That kind of flexibility and power. And again, interaction with turn 1 Soul Ring is huge. We want redundancy on that effect. Could run more cards like that. For example, Fragmentize is a card, but then you're sort of narrowed down to a disenchant effect, which we already have in Vandal Blast. And of course, having run a Braid, we're running a Braid to also deal with artifacts on turn 2. As well as we've got Thieving Skydiver if we have any kind of mana acceleration. So there's a lot of things that we can do to deal with early Soul Ring. Of course we can copy it and so forth. So, but just having one more flexible card that isn't quite as narrowly focused as Fragmentize is just absolutely lovely. And with that in mind, I actually intended and previously did add March of Otherworldly Light because it's a turn 1 play that removes Mana Crypt. The problem with it is I didn't realize, but this card is unfortunately Prismatic Ending is perfectly costed to do what it does, and March of Otherworldly Light is not. And March of Otherworldly Light in blue would be Spell Blast. For those of you who are familiar with like some really old school stuff, blue X counter a spell that costs X. And the problem with Spell Blast, and you may not even be familiar with the card because it's not good, is that when you play a card like that, you're always paying more mana than the casting cost of the spell. So with Otherworldly Light, it runs into the Spell Blast problem. So if they play a turn 1 Soul Ring, you need 2 mana to remove it. And of course, we do have a 2 mana card that will kill it, like Abrade, right? But the reason for running Abrade is that Abrade is a 2 mana card. It kills a Soul Ring and you're losing tempo, but it also kills like a Thran Dynamo. It kills a Gilded Lotus. It kills something expensive that has 3 toughness if it's a creature, right? So we're okay with the fact that it loses tempo specifically on Soul Ring because of the fact that it picks up tempo on other targets. March of Otherworldly Light never does that. You lose tempo on everything you target unless you exile a card. And if a white card specifically, which is really hard to do because the deck doesn't run a lot of white cards, and the white cards it does run are so good that you don't want to exile them most of the time. But we would do it if we were exiling like a Vindicate to kill a Soul Ring early. But then you're losing card advantage. That's the other problem. So you're either losing card advantage or you're losing tempo with this card. And so it really is just a bad fragmentizer, a bad disenchant. And so for all those reasons, primarily though, the fact that it does not kill turn 1 Soul Ring, which is what you want to kill the most. If I were going to add another effect like that, I would actually just probably add Fragmentize specifically as another turn 1 Soul Ring solution, where this card just isn't it. And so doesn't make the cut, but Prismatic Ending does. So that card's in now from Modern Horizons 2. And I think the rest is about where we were. We snuck the Portable Hole in from Adventures in the Forgotten Realms for all the reasons I just stated. And then mana base has been tweaked ever so slightly. Of course, Saga made its way in from Modern Horizons 2 as well. Covered that in previous videos. Rogram Triome is now from Ikoria. Lair of Behemoths has now become pretty much a staple in this deck. I was on the fence about it. In fact, I think there was a video Brian made where he was using it and I wasn't, and I've completely flipped on the card. I actually removed Plateau, so it is a slight weakness in the fact that if I want to tithe specifically to get a red and white source, like if I want to tithe into a red source that comes into play untapped, I currently cannot do it because I have Triome. It's a red source that comes into play tapped, but I almost always want to tithe for as many islands as I can get, and this is being another island is just a step up for a lot of reasons. Of course, there's Vedalken Shackles. There's the fact that blue spells are good. There's the lovely Mystic Sanctuary, which cares very much about you getting islands into play. So really want to get Triome out, and of course, most of the time with Triome, we're just going to fetch it on turn 1 anyway. Typically, put it into play tapped, and then move on with our game. So. Rogram Triome also, while it is a little worse with tithe if you need the red mana right away. So like if you're tithing so that you can Vandal Blast or Abrade on the next turn, no dice there. But it also makes certain fetches just a smidge better. In particular, the red-green fetch, so Wooded Foothills, previously couldn't. Previously, if you wanted to get white mana, you couldn't get blue. If you wanted to get blue mana, you couldn't get white. So you'd either get the Plateau or you'd get the Volcanic. Now you can get all 3 in a single card with the Wooded Foothills. And so that actually is the opposite of the tithe problem. So fetches like this become a lot stronger. Like when I have an opening hand with Wooded Foothills in the past, I was like kind of sad because I would go get a turn 1 like Scalding Tarn, or not Scalding Tarn, but Steam Vents, and I'd feel a little bad about it because red's really a splash color, and typically I want to be getting white and black. I want to be always getting blue and then white and black early on. But now, whenever I have an opening hand with Wooded Foothills, I'm super pleased for the most part because I'm going to fetch the Triome, and so I'm going to get that island that I want to get, which is the must. I'm still going to get my red mana source, and I get a primary color, which is white, a primary splash color. So for all those reasons, I'm sold on it. There's one other interesting card in here. There's no Urborg anymore. The deck has seemed to operate fine without Urborg. Been casting Necro without too much of a problem at all. It is a great card to get, but it's not. Sometimes it hurts you, and sometimes it's just so-so. Urborg was really cool when it turned Mishra's Workshop into a usable land, but people still play Urborg, so you sometimes get to feed off of that way. But for the most part, I haven't missed it much. There's Urza's Saga in the deck, as I was saying earlier, and then there's Fiery Islet. So um, because the deck picked up, because we added a Braid to the deck, it's got a little more red. I wanted a little more red mana sources, and of course, doing the Plateau to Rograms broke even on red. So I wanted to add another mana source. So I actually added Fire Islet. It's a card that's been in and out of the deck in the past. Seems pretty good. It does let you do things with Imperial Seal and the other tutors where you can sneak the card right directly into your hand. It's an extra red source, and when you don't need it, you can get rid of it. And of course, it has some tricks with Crucible. It's not a card that I'm in love with, but I'm not. You're never really disappointed to draw the card, and um, because the Plateau, which was a way to cast turn one Vandal Blast, was removed, having the Fiery Islet, having the Triome to replace it does not allow me to cast turn one Vandal Blast with the same level of consistency. So adding the Fiery Islet gets me back to the same number of red sources that I had in the past, which should make it easier for me to make that play when I need to, Vandal Blast early on. So mana base is up to 31 lands. It's felt a lot more stable. I was at one point down to 28, and I'm not happy. I wasn't super happy with that. I like this a little bit better. Good decks will disrupt your mana base, and it's just important that you continue to play mana on a regular basis. One card that's not in here is Treachery. It's a lot worse, and kind of basically the Abyss is in the Treachery slot. Treachery is just a lot worse when you're running the Abyss, typically because you may just not really have any targets. Treachery is, of course, in some ways better because it's a blue card, so you can force with it. You can force a negation and force a will with it, but and of course it does let you do some cool tricks with like Winter Orb and such. But having said that, against the really tight decks, the really strong decks, sometimes getting 2 blue and a total of 5 mana and being able to spend all that without losing the game to a cheap counterspell or other interaction can be a big ask. Whereas the Abyss you can play very easily off of. You need a single black, which means you don't necessarily have to spend blue. For example, you might play it off a Scrubland or whatever, but you definitely don't have to spend much, right? So you can play it off like Soul Ring mana, you can play it off Grim Monolith mana, and so it's a lot easier to play and protect in those matches where you need to. And so it just feels a little bit better to run the Abyss. So with all that said, I'm going to run through some games. And of course, I guess the other card that's not in here is the 5-drop Teferi, the 3 blue white one. So if you notice, the Teferi, the Treachery, and the Sword of Feast and Famine are all out. And of course, we haven't played the card Fire and Ice in a long time. That's been out. And so there's actually no ways to cheat on Winter Orb, like where you're untapping your lands. We don't have Urza anymore. So there's no way to cheat on Winter Orb and untap your lands. But it seems to be operating very well with just having a glut of additional mana sources and with careful mana and management, basically. It's feeling pretty good, and it doesn't seem to be massively important to the Breya deck. And of course, there is the Breya cheat, which is if you have to, you can sacrifice the Winter Orb at the end of their turn and then untap your lands on your turn. Maybe play like a will and put it back into play or whatever. So there is still the Breya cheat even without any other method. So let's take a look at this game now, and you can see just in the last 7 days I've got lots of games. You can see I've got a couple losses in here, especially early on. I made a few changes, and then yeah, I took a few losses. You can see like 1, 2, 3, 4 losses, but considering the win-loss ratio and the fact that I advertise now, when I advertise for CEDH videos, and I link to my channel. So I want to make sure people know what they're getting into. So when the folks join my games, they're coming to play CEDH or to try to challenge themselves against a deck that I'm saying is like CEDH level. So they basically they know what they're getting into and they show up prepared for the fight. And so that makes this ratio something I'm actually in the past would have been really disappointed with, where I was getting like 90 plus win rate, 90 plus percent win rate. And now I'm down to whatever this ends up being. I think it's something like a 75, maybe a little higher, 80% win rate. I mean, I've got like 4 losses out of 20 games or something along those lines. So, I mean, it's been pretty good. Maybe a few more games than that actually. But it's no 90%, it's no 95% or 100% where I was having these huge win streaks, and it's because I'm playing better players and better decks, and that's just that's going to come with it. So in the meantime, I did want to cover just a little bit of gameplay, and I'll just cover today the first game against Rocky McChesterflex. Um, he just conceded early to a start on my part that was quite good, and then he just jumped back in. But I'll run through that really fast just so you can see. He's playing Prime Speaker Zagana. I win the roll, and of course I play a fetch land here, and that allows me to go get the trio, which will almost always be the targeted card. So I'm going to just go ahead and stand up 2 blue here. I don't have a counter, but my opponent doesn't need to know that. And Simic Growth chambers a land back to his hand. I don't really, that's always a rough sign there. And then I sneak out the Tomb. I was thinking I needed to play around Days, but then of course he had picked up his island last turn. I wasn't expecting that, so uh, I was going to use Teferi actually as bait or Skullclamp as bait. I hadn't decided yet, but I waited a turn to make my play because I knew I had the Tomb coming up, and I wanted to be able to play 2, very potent cards in the same turn. And of course, with my opponent tapped out, I was able to just play Teferi and Skullclamp, and then my opponent just conceded 2. He's got an incredibly slow start, probably hurting. He's already down a card because of the discard, self-inflicted there. And then I've got tempo and card drawing, and of course have negated all his counters. So with all that in mind, he just concedes, jumps back in, and we have a pretty decent game. So we'll, in this case, my opponent does take a mulligan. Again, he's playing Prime Speaker Zagana, but this time he gets to go first. So this is the one that Prime Speaker, 6 mana, Merfolk Wizard. When it comes into the battlefield, it gets +1/+1 counters on it, where X is the greatest power among other creatures you control. And then when it enters the battlefield, you draw cards equal to its power. So if, for example, my opponent has a Llanowar Elf, this thing comes into play, sees the 1/1 Llanowar Elf, it gets a +1/+1 counter, making it a 2/2, and then he draws 2 cards because that's the power of the Zagana after that's all figured out. So if he has anything bigger than a Llanowar Elf, same thing, check the size of the creature, add 1, put a bunch of counters on it, and draw a bunch of cards. So it's a Brain Geyser basically, for the most part. So anyway, we're gonna play it though. So my opponent's going first, and I don't have a fast hand, but I have an acceptable hand, and I do have Shackles against a green deck, which is usually pretty good. Opponent gets a Tribe Elder here, so fortunately the Ancient Tomb just rises to the top for me again in this game, and I'm able to tomb out a Talisman, and then Talisman, Hallowed Fountain, and these are my 3 pieces of equipment. Skullclamp, the Reality Chip, and GTA. And against the green-blue deck, what do you get? And the answer sometimes is GTA. GTA shuts down the green component of the deck, typically, because typically the green component is made up mostly of creatures. GTA is, the one is like an artifact abyss, right? And then the Reality Chip and Skullclamp typically not shut down, but overpower the blue component because blue wants to be trading, trade a counter spell for your spell. And when you're drawing like 2 or 3 cards per turn off of a Reality Chip, or you Skullclamp and just burst a bunch of cards into your hand off of Breya tokens, then the blue deck can't keep up. So the question is, what do you get here? And the answer for me was the Reality Chip. And the reason is that I have the Vedalken Shackles to deal with the green side. It's also a very good disruptor for green. And so what I really want to do is just, I want to get more cards. And Clamp is a card I can get with Trinket Mage later on, or other artifact search. and Clamp, my opponent gets a forest and an island with the Cultivate. And Clamp is also a card that only will really benefit me when I get Breya down, and I'm a couple turns away from that. But Reality Chip can start working for me right away. If my opponent wants to play Draw Go, then I can cheat it into play with Stoneforge Mystic, and we can play that game. So on this turn, I have to, unfortunately, so my mana was kind of sus there. I had to I needed to use the mire, and I needed to get. I was really looking like I need to get black, but I also need to get red because I want to play Breya at some point, or I might get like a Dak Faden or whatever. And so the only way I could get both black and red was to go get the Badlands here, which is as bad as the name describes, but unfortunately, but it did work out in this specific instance. It allows me to DT. I DT for Crypt because I'm thinking if I'm going to use the future sight effect of the reality chip, then the main thing that's going to drive that is going to be having access to lots of mana. So I go ahead and play the reality chip here, thinking that I don't need to sneak it into play, and why tap my Stoneforge when I could tap it to attack. So this game is going to break slightly. The reality chip's going to ultimately start showing cards that are not on the top of my deck, and I'll point that out when it happens, but it's not going to affect anything. And so fortunately, I see the top card of my deck is Remand, and I realize I could equip the reality chip over, and then that would allow me to play the Remand, but I'd be completely tapped out. So since I have a Fierce Guardianship and I have 3 mana untapped, I don't reconfigure and move the chip over. So the chip will allow me to view the top of my library without actually allowing me to play it. And I know the next card's going to be a Remand. So I really just want to protect my board here as best I can, and Fierce Guardianship was the best way to do that. I could have also played like Shackles or something, and it worked out great because my opponent had an end of turn Nature's Claim, and I'm able to counter that. And so we'll carry on with this turn there. All right, so opponent plays a tap land, which means he's to turn off from playing his commander if he wants to. And then Molder Slug. Holy crap, I haven't seen this in a long time, but what a hoser. So my opponent's played Nature's Claim into Molder Slug. So my opponent definitely came to party, right? So Molder Slug, at the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player sacrifices an artifact. So this is the Abyss for artifacts. So I'm playing the Abyss, which totally also screws a green deck over typically. And my opponent's playing the green version of that for artifacts, which completely hoses blue. So beginning of my upkeep, I'm thinking, okay, I could stack Chip, Crypt, or Progress. Progress, a Crypt is 2 mana, Progress is 1. I have both of my colors in my hand, so I'm not going to need the Progress necessarily. I could have sacked the Crypt in order to play Breya this turn and then have fuel for the sacrifice effect, but I've got one more card that I can sacrifice, and I don't care that much because my opponent is clearly not playing a green weenie deck, so things like Shackles and Jitte, thankfully I didn't get it, are not going to be as useful. I'm willing to, but knowing that I have a Remand coming is influencing my choice also. So we'll go ahead and continue. Top card, Force of Will, also changes my decision-making process here. So I'm going to go ahead and equip the reality chip and play the Shackles. And actually, I had forgotten that I would have equipped the chip and not necessarily played the Shackles there if I wanted to play the Remand. But with the Force of Will, I'm actually able to play the Shackles, which is beautiful because my opponent now thinks that my opponent thinks that it's a green light for a big play like this Prime Speaker, which will tap them out and give me some tempo off the Force of Will, and it gives me fuel to feed the Molder Slug. So, and that's my opponent can't resist, and I wouldn't either if I were the opponent. I would absolutely play the Prime Speaker here. And of course, it gets Force of Will using. And so the way this works is Remand was in my hand. I can't Force of Will with a blue card from my library. And if Force of Will was the card in my hand and Remand was on top, I could not Force of Will with the Remand on the top of my library. But because Force of Will was on top, I can play the Force of Will off the top, and I can use fuel from my hand to do it. And the top card of my library is Rift, which is fantastic because right now I just need tempo, right? Like I have card drawing, so I just need time and let my card drawing overwhelm my opponent. So unfortunately, during my upkeep, the Slug is going to go on the stack. So even if I bounced the Slug with that on the stack, it would still resolve and I would still have to sack. So at this point, as I have to continue with my plan, sacrifice the Vedalken Shackles. But I will play the Cyclonic Rift prior to drawing, so that because I don't want to draw the card and then I can't play it off the top, and I want to play it now so I can get card advantage. So the trick's going to be, how do I tap my mana? Because I don't know what my next card is. what if my next card's Dak Faden and I tap like Island Badlands here or something, right? So I have no idea. So if it makes more sense to tap the Crypt and an Island and then waste mana, and then what if my next card's a Lotus or what? But I ultimately decide that that's going to be the correct. Keeping colored mana is going to make more sense than keeping one extra colorless. And oops, oh, oh, jeez. And I'm rewarded anyway. I do lose a colorless here, but I do get to make some really great plays. So I rift the Molder Slug after sacrificing the Shackles, and then I hit on Vault. So I am able to tap Ancient Tomb, taking 2 damage, play the Vault, and then tap the Vault immediately and play Thran Dynamo. And then I find a fetch land. So I'm like, this is great. I'll fetch into another spell that I can play, but unfortunately I fetch land into another land, and it's one of the best lands ever printed, but it is another land, and I've already played one, so I'm stalled out for the turn. I have no defenses, right? But my opponent uses the opportunity to just play Molder Slug again, and of course and then a Paradise Druid, which is just a mana producer that I can't target. And with Molder Slug, I now have lots of, with Future Sight running, I've got lots of cards I can afford to throw away because I got them for free off the top of my library anyway. So we'll go ahead and eat the Mana Vault there. And no, I won't untap the dead Mana Vault. Lose another coin flip and pause. Oop. And I draw a Saga. Now, before I'm going to play the land, I want to play lands off the top of my library when I stall out. So I'm going to hold on to the land, and then if I run out of mana and I never find land, then I'll play the Urza Saga. But instead, what I find is I draw the Saga, and there's an Impulse on the top of my library. So I hold the control key so that I can respond to my instant with an instant. And I cast Impulse. And so Impulse goes on the stack, but it then passes priority back to myself and says, would you like to respond to Impulse? And by luck, the next card is another instant, Brainstorm. So I cast Brainstorm, and I'm holding control still. So now the Brainstorm goes in the stack, and I pass priority back to myself, and it says, would you like to respond to your own Brainstorm? And underneath the Brainstorm is another instant, Mystical Tutor. So I'm like, yes, indeed I would. So I actually add Mystical Tutor to the stack. And then under that is Portable Hole. If this had been Swords to Plowshares, well, I didn't have a white, but in theory I could have like put that on the stack too. But anyway, we're going to resolve. So in reverse order, I'm going to last in, first out, right? So we're going to do Mystical Tutor first. And so I'll give you a second to decide what you tutor for. And I do have some problems going on here. So let's take a look at some of the options for Mystical Tutor. Everything on the left, right, we can Mystical Tutor for. So I could like Deluge here, for example. I could Mind Twist for 1. I could Demonic Tutor. There's probably some other plays that I haven't thought of, but there's one that jumped out at me that's neither of the ones that I just suggested. So see if you can figure out what it is. And then we will proceed. But then keep in mind that if I Deluge, the Reality Chip is not currently a creature. See how it's grayed out? It's not a creature or a jellyfish at the moment because it's equipped. It's a legendary artifact equipment. So if I Deluge for 6, I'll kill kill my guy, and then the Reality Chip will fall off my creature and go back to being a 0/4 after the Deluge resolves, which is good. But it won't be equipped to anything, which means I'll have to re-equip it if I want. I'll still get to see the top of my library, but I won't get to cast it unless I re-equip it. So I prefer not to Deluge. So with that in mind, I decide that I'm going to go get Yawgmoth's Will. Now, of course, there's a Brainstorm waiting to resolve, so we're going to resolve the Brainstorm. And I draw Will, Opal, Scroll, and I have to put 2 cards back now. So we're going to put back a land for sure, and then we'll figure out what the next card needs to be. So Cavern of Souls is going back, and then the other card that ends up going back is I decided to put back Merchant Scroll because I kind of don't have time. I kind of don't need to necessarily Merchant Scroll when I have a Will coming with like all kinds of stuff I'm going to be doing with my mana, and it's just a little excessive. So I've got an Impulse left though, and I can take it if it's the best of the next 4. So we'll Impulse, and I see Cavern, which I just put back, Scroll I put back, so Scrubland, Mana Drain. So with these 4, I'm definitely taking the Mana Drain here, because what I'm hoping to do is use Mana Drain to fuel up a nasty Will and just win this game right away. And as luck would have it, so the other thing is Cavern of Souls and Saga unfortunately don't produce blue. I get to play the Opal, but I still don't have a second blue, so I was hoping to find a blue source so I could actually Mana Drain this turn and then will next turn. And as luck would have it, there's a Gilded Lotus right on top. So I get to play the Opal, and then run out the. I'm gonna go ahead and play the Saga now because I know it's safe to play the Saga, and I want to get it started on its growth, and I can use the Saga mana to play the Lotus there. And then look at this beauty hiding right on top of the deck. Vindicate. So lovely. So now I can actually Vindicate and still leave Mana Drain up. So I'm going to go ahead and blow a Vindicate. I am floating an extra mana here. And I find an Arcane Signet. And if it wasn't a loaded, like maybe if I'd done that slightly differently or whatever, I could have like played the Arcane Signet and used it to cast the Lotus or something. But anyway, there's no need to be greedy. If I cast the Arcane Signet, Mana Drain goes down. It's total greed, and I'm not going to do it. Doesn't mean I'll draw it next turn, but it's fine. I'm going to get a buttload of card advantage off Yawgmoth's Will. I don't need to worry about adding one more mana to the mana pool and taking my shields down. All right, so opponent draws. He's got 2 cards in hand. Questionable as to whether or not the 2 cards in my opponent's hand are as good as the 2 cards in my hand. But there is a way out of this. I could be setting myself up. So my opponent taps 8 mana here and spends 1 card to turnabout himself, untapping his lands. And I'm like, okay, so that leaves him with exactly 1 card in hand. If I Mana Drain here and the card in his hand is like, let's say, Mana Drain, and he Mana Drains back, he gets to untap all of his land, play Prime Speaker Zagana with the 2 floating and then a few more lands, draw some cards, clear his attack step, get the mana from his Mana Drain, and then maybe play some more cards. Could completely destroy me. So I decide I'm going to let the turnabout go. And what I'm hoping is that the last card in his hand is the card he's going to play. He's not going to play Zagana because it will give him 3 cards here, but maybe my opponent would like to play something more powerful like a Tooth and Nail here, and then I can just Mana Drain it and win the game on the spot. So I'm hoping that that's what happens here. Unfortunately, it is not what happens. So my opponent goes for the Zagana. Now, for the same reason I just said, I decide I'm not going to Mana Drain. I mean, this is an incredibly juicy target here. And I could just Mana Drain it, and if I do, I'm certainly going to win the game. But the thing is, there's a non-zero chance that my opponent counters here, in which case he's going to draw extra cards. Even if he doesn't counter with Mana Drain, he's going to draw extra cards. He might draw another counter spell, and then counters my will, and then I lose. So what I would rather do is I'm going to let him have it, and then I'm going to take the chance that he might like tap more mana or whatever. But on the next turn, I can do something like play Yawgmoth's Will. My opponent counters. I can counter back with Mana Drain. He's going to need to have, 2 counters and enough mana, and that's assuming he doesn't play anything off of the Zagana. And I'm like, he might get greedy here. So for all those reasons, I decide I'm just going to let it go because Yawgmoth's Will wins the game. So I'd rather just protect the play that wins the game rather than try to disrupt a play that does not necessarily guarantee my opponent to win. So my opponent hits a land drop and starts tapping mana, which I'm really happy to see. Plays Ghostly Flicker, and for some reason it says targeting N Prodzig 2 and Prime Speaker. So I paused for a really long time, like, what is going on with this card? I didn't know you could target. He's going to exile me. Anyway, and then my opponent was like, hey, hurry it up. And I'm like, hey, sorry, it's telling me something crazy. So I wasn't exactly sure what was going to happen here, so I just let it go. So this Flicker is really strange because you would think that they would both come into play at the same time, and the Zagana would see the Paradise Druid, and then he would draw. But actually, something strange happens. The Zagana pops into play. He actually clicks Paradise Druid and then Zagana. So he actually clicks his cards in the wrong order. So the Zagana pops into play first and can only draw 1 card. So my opponent only draws a single card there because the Paradise Druid pops into play afterwards. So the order you click your cards matter there, which is an unfortunate. That's a Magic Online problem. In real life, you generally speaking, you're not going to make that mistake. But yeah, I couldn't do anything about it. He should have 5 cards in hand right now. But my opponent just keeps tapping mana here, goes for a Sylvan Library. I'm super happy. I could Mana Drain, but once again, the card that matters is Yawgmoth's Will, and I can deal with Sylvan Library in a moment. Sylvan normally is a huge threat. Opponent's got almost 40 life to work with and could draw a ton of cards over the next couple of turns with Sylvan, but there's not going to be a next couple of turns with the Yawg Will ready to break my opponent's back here. And remember, we still have Future Sight running too. So in hindsight, it would have been great if I would have just Mana Drained the Prime Speaker, but again, I don't know if the opponent has a counterspell and they're just sandbagging here or what. So I'm going to draw, and I draw a Arcane Signet. We knew that was going to happen. Urza Saga ticks up. There's a Duretti on top. I could use Duretti to kill. I could just play it off the top, but the Yawgmoth's Will play is just way too juicy, so we're just going to run that out. So I'm just thinking carefully about my mana, and I realize actually there's multiple black spells I want to play, so the best way to tap my mana is actually to leave the Badlands alone and triple black off of the Lotus in order to make this play. So we're going to run the Yawg Will out. It happens. I do it pre-combat so that if I have to mana drain, I can make a couple, like let's say my opponent had a Force of Will here, and then I mana drain it. I can play a few cards off the will, empty my mana pool, and then declare my attack phase, empty my attack phase, get all of the mana, and continue with a giant will. Fortunately, no Force of Will happens here for my opponent, because that actually would have been even better for me in a way. So anyway, I run out Mana Vault, I run out of Bloodstained Mire. I'm going to go ahead and get a untapped Underground and float a ton of mana. And here you can see the obvious power that nobody has questioned and we've known about for a long time, of course. But Cyclonic Rift and the ability to just replay it off like using it early for tempo and then using it later for massive tempo is just so huge. Now, the top card of my library, Sensei's Divining Top with Future Sight, is complete with Reality Chip. Is you just play the top, you activate the top, top goes back on top of your library, you play the top, you activate the top, and you can just refill your whole hand. However, the replay is bugging. Everything on the top of my library you see from now on is not real. The Duretti was real. Everything else is going to be fake, but I'm not going to play anything off the top because it's a Yawgmoth's Will turn, and at the end of the turn, the game ends. So I rift my opponent back into Oblivion, Demonic Tutor. Once again, the deck's going to shuffle up. I go get Tezzeret. There was no Swords to Plowshares. I don't remember what it was. Let's just assume it was, land or whatever. I'm going to go ahead and tap 5 mana. I cast Tezzeret. And see if you can figure out what I fetch here, but yeah, super easy. I could have used Tezzeret to untap like 6 mana here and then continue to play a bunch of craziness, and I would have done that, but I have an easy way to just win the game on the spot, and I like winning the game on the spot. And what's going to happen is, again, fact fiction, not on top of my library. Don't know what was. But what's going to happen, of course, is my opponent's best play is like, he can untap his I guess breeding pool and maybe play like Sylvan and then be completely tapped out. And I don't just have the Sylvan because he's tapped out. I'll hold this so that I can Force a Will something like the green pitch spell that destroys 2 artifacts, right? Anything that I don't want him killing like Reality Chip, Winter Orb, right? So sure, have the Sylvan, no problem. What good is the Sylvan library with no mana? It's the same. It's the Agent Smith problem, right? Like sure, you can have a phone call, but what good is a phone call without a mouth, right? Same problem for Sylvan here. Other than that, my opponent really doesn't have any plays. And of course, I'm going to get to untap a boatload of mana. I'm going to Tezzeret for 1 and go get the Sensei's Divining Top I was talking about. Ignore this top card. It's whatever. And then once I have Sensei's Divining Top with, well, actually, let me back up. I'm going to untap a boatload of mana, and Saga is going to go get Sensei's Divining Top for free. And I'm going to use Tezzeret to untap, like Lotus Vault. And I'm going to use Sensei's Divining Top to play like just an absolutely obscene amount of cards, right? Like I'm just going to spew cards out, fill my hand up. It's a brain geyser for as much as I want almost. And so yeah, the game's over. So my opponent concedes. So super cool though. Just a neat little example of one single Stoneforge to get a Reality Chip against a deck that really struggles to kill creatures, and I had the counterspell to the initial Nature's Claim, allows me to completely overcome a Molder Slug early on in the game, and then of course the power of Rift to basically like, yeah, sure, you can do whatever you want, and then Rift Orb death, right? Like it's nice having that back in the deck. I'm really pleased with it, and yeah, just a super good, super resilient build of Breya. And hopefully you just enjoyed that. So I realize it's been a long time. The next video should be a showcase. I'll probably run through many of the videos that you just saw in my queue, including some of the losses. You can see what went wrong there, and hopefully make an interesting video with lots of plays. But in the meantime, just want to get something out there, let you know that I haven't given up on the channel. I just unfortunately I had a big move, and that requires a lot of focus on other things. And when you look at the amount of games I played, it looks like a lot, but you have to consider that that's over the last few months, right? So I barely played it all. Um, and yeah, that's all I've got. There is one more thing I will give you a heads up on. If you're a subscriber to Brian Weissman's channel, if you're not, first of all, why aren't you? You absolutely should be. But if you're a subscriber to Brian Weissman's channel, there is a video that we um, co-recorded, and he has it. He's currently busy with his life as well, but I know that it is going to make its way up at some point. And so I'd like invite you to keep an eye out for that because it is a phenomenal video, and I had to be very careful to resist the urge to spoil it. And all I can say is that one of the well, all I can say is keep an eye out and check it out when it shows up. And in the meantime, thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.